to our guest speakers today.
Thank you, Laura. I am so excited about today's topic and today's speakers. As you all know, OFAR participants, you've been really deeply embedded this spring semester in implementing changes in your classroom. So really focusing on what you're doing, how you're changing your teaching practices, adapting OER, changing your assignments. Whoops,
Sorry about that,
there we
folks.
go. So you've been very focused on what you're doing in the classroom, and we've had great speakers about teaching practices. And today we're pulling back a little and taking a little bit more of a macro view of where our classrooms fit in the larger system, not only the California Community College system, but also the system that connects California community colleges or connects our students to transfer opportunities to transfer and complete their bachelor's degrees. So we've got two fantastic guests today. First, Dr. Roger Purnell. She is president and CEO of her own consulting company. She's a very, very well experienced researcher across the California community colleges. I've had the good fortune to intersect with her on another project, and so appreciate the breadth and depth of her knowledge, and am grateful for her to be here. She was a lead researcher, the lead researcher on a study that she's going to share with us today. And I appreciate her time today. She's going to jet from here over to San Jose to the Academic Senate plenary meeting, talking about the same topic. So thank you very much for being here, Dr. Purnell. And then following Dr. Purnell, we have Dr. Jarrell Hill, who is Dean of the School of Human Development and Education at Pacific Oaks College, which is a private institution in Pasadena. Dr. Hill is an activist, he's a scholar, and he is also currently a co-interim vice president of academic affairs. So I don't know how he has the time to be here, but I am so grateful for him taking the time to be here. And I believe that Alyssa is not here today, but Alyssa Nguyen, our good friend with the RP group, who participated in the research study that Dr. Purnell is going to share with us. Alyssa and the RP group, as you all know, they are our partners and thought partners, as well as our researchers in the OFAR program. So a big shout out and thanks to Alyssa as well. So with that, we're going to turn it over to Dr. Purnell, and then we're going to turn it over to Dr. Hill. So thank you. Roger, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, James, for that generous introduction. I'm Roger Purnell. I'm in this space, a senior researcher with the RP group, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the organization. I'm going to tell you about two related studies, Through the Gate and the African American Transfer Tipping Point Project. But first, let me tell you a little bit about the RP group. It actually stands for the Research and Planning Group for California Community Colleges, and we're affectionately known as the RP Group. And I always joke that if I had gotten to the name first, that would have been the name of my company, but they beat me to it. RP Group is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. It started off as a membership organization for institutional research, planning, and effectiveness professionals in the community college system. And now it's kind of the representative group for those professionals. And it's really about increasing institutional effectiveness and equitable student outcomes. And they do that by providing planning, research, evaluation, professional development, and technical assistance. And what's so unique about the organization, everyone that works for the organization, the board, the staff, either have been community college students, are working at a community college, or have worked at a community college. So we really come from the field. So I'm going to tell you a little about this project that I was so fortunate to be part of. And the first kind of effort was called Through the Gate. And this was an attempt to look at statewide data, student record data received from the community college system, to really get a sense of the transfer landscape, right? And so what they found was that there were 5 different kind of groups of students. When they looked at the data and looked at course taking patterns, these are the 5 groups of students. So let me start with the easy group, the group in yellow that's presented in yellow. These are the transfer achievers. These are students that completed the requirements and successfully transferred from the community college to a college or university. Then at the bottom left, we have the transfer explorers. So these are students that, based on their course taking patterns, so they're completing 12 to 44 transferable units within 6 years, but not yet transferred. That suggests that they're transfer motivated, right? The next group are momentum students. So these are students that have completed 45 to 59 transferable units, have a 2.0 GPA overall, and again, have not yet transferred. The next group of students right above our momentum students, we have students who are near the gate. And I want to have you pay special attention to the near the gate students, because I'm going to talk about them a bit more throughout this presentation. And these are students that have earned 60 or more transferable units, maintaining that 2.0 overall GPA, but have not yet completed transfer level English and or math. All right, and that's going to be important. Math is going to be important. And then we have students that are at the gate. So these are students that have completed that associate degree for transfer that's going to help them to clear that path to a California State University, or they completed the requirements necessary for transfer. They have that 2.0 GPA, but they did not yet make it through that transfer gate. They haven't made it through the gate. So those are the groups of students that were identified through this landscape analysis of transfer motivated students. And overall, they found that more than half of these students leave the system entirely without even earning a degree or credential. When a student is stuck at the gate, so the students in green, it's usually because they have not completed transfer level math. Is that a surprise to anyone? Or they don't have a strong enough GPA overall. And in fact, 92% of near the gate, so the students in kind of the purplish color, needed to complete transfer level math, their math requirement, and African-American students are least likely to complete this requirement. And if students don't transfer within a year of becoming transfer ready, so the students in green here, their chances of ever transferring drastically reduce. So there seems to be a critical 12-month window as soon as they get at the gate to help them move through that transfer gate. We also found that when compared to white students, African-American students are 2 times more likely to transfer than remain near the gate. The problem is that very few Black students, and I'll use African-American Black students interchangeably here, actually make it near the transfer gate, right? The other thing to keep in mind is that we found an interesting finding. 75% of African-American students who make it near or at the transfer gate ultimately transfer. And this is the highest among any ethnic group. Yet many African-American students do not make it past 30 units in 6 years, right? So if we can get students near the gate, particularly Black students near the gate, their chances of transferring increase drastically. Next slide. So I want to talk about, so this question led to the African-American Transfer Tipping Point Project. And so what we wanted to find out is, like, we looked at course taking patterns. There seems to be a tipping point in terms of unit completion and GPA and course completion that's important. But what is the big aha? I mean, what else do we need to look at to ensure that Black students are successfully transferring? And we understood that there's an intersection of factors. It's not just, we understand these students are whole people. There's a lot going on for them. Let's understand what can help them be successful in their transfer journey. And for those programs that are successfully helping Black students transfer, what are they doing that's particularly effective? So those were the guiding questions behind this next set of research. Next slide. And so there was 3 parts of it. First was phase 1, really exploring student course taking patterns. So again, looking at statewide data. The second phase was interviewing folks on campuses where there were high percentages of African-American students transferring. So we talked both to practitioners and to transfer motivated Black students. And the third phase was a survey of Black students, again, across the system. And we looked at 3 groups of students, those that were currently enrolled. It could be transfer, it could be credit and non-credit courses. those Black students that had left in the last 4 years without earning a degree or credential, and Black students that had successfully transferred in the last 4 years. So that was the survey population for phase 3. So let me tell you a little bit about what we learned. So again, phase 1 was the look at the statewide data, and we looked at first-time cohorts. So students entering community college for the first time, and these are Black students, between 2011, 2016, Black and non-Black students, excuse me, and we tracked them for 6 years, right? And we wanted students that had completed at least 12 transferable units with passing grades, because that suggested to us that these were transfer motivated students. And we had almost 70,000 Black students and nearly 800,000 non-Black students that were part of the study population. Next slide. So what we learned was, what I'm going to present now is students, Black students that possess these characteristics, and then Black students that did not possess these characteristics, right? And what you find for the arrows that are green is that these factors were associated with being more likely to get at least near the transfer gate, right? So those students that had 60 or more units, had a 2.0 GPA, and had not completed English and or math, transferable English and or math. So we see that passing transfer level English and math in the first year, these students were 310% more likely to get at least near the transfer gate. And as you remember, if Black students get to that point, 75% of those students successfully transfer. Completing one or the other transfer level course, either transfer level English or math in the first year, again, very positive. These students were more likely, but not as likely as those students that completed both English and math in the first year. Academic counseling, again, more likely, 60% more likely to get at least near the transfer gate. Participating in MOJA, which is a Black student support program that's really informed by the legacy of the Black diaspora. Those students were again, 20% more likely to get at least near the transfer gate. And then we did find some factors that were associated with being less likely to get to that transfer, at least that transfer gate for Black students. And so those that were low income, involved with DSPS, disabled student programs and services, and most importantly, put on academic probation, were less likely to get near the transfer gate. So I want to talk a little bit about that, right? Because your question is, okay, I just told you about African-American students, comparing African-American students who had these factors and those that didn't. So how does this compare to students who were non-African-American students? And what we found is that for 110% of non-African-American students, if they received counseling, they're 110% more likely to get at or near the transfer gate. So that's the double the impact for those students. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about why that might be the case, why academic counseling may be more powerful for getting those students near the transfer gate. The other thing to keep in mind about academic probation is that 41% of Black students are put on probation versus 29% of non-African-American students. So when you look at this finding that 70% are less likely to get near at the gate, there's more opportunity for that to be the case for Black students. Next slide. So phase 2, we wanted to explore a little bit more of these phase 1 findings. So we did interviews and focus groups with students Black students that were transfer motivated. And again, we selected administrators and students from institutions that had the high rates of transfer for Black students. And what we learned is that the passing math and English, students often talked about, there's an instructor they spoke about by name who really helped to build a relationship with them, really said, did things and said things that suggested they were really about the student's success, and help them be confident as a student and help them learn key skills that were going to be necessary for them in their key subjects. So it could be something like learning how to write a paper, a research paper, which is going to be critical for many different, or how to write in general, which is going to be really critical for many different courses. So they talked about things like that. In terms of academic counseling, students really felt like, I just don't feel like they see me, they hear me. I have to come in each time and tell my story. I don't feel like they really know me. Oftentimes I don't feel reflected in who's in the offices. So really tended to the students we spoke with tended to avoid general and transfer center counseling, right? So that may be related to the finding we saw about, why maybe counseling isn't as impactful for Black students as it is for non-Black students. Students also talked about involvement in the Emotia program as really critical to their success. Talked about the fact that they had a dedicated counselor that knew them. They were able to build a relationship, that reached out to them to say, hey, I see that you're struggling, or hey, I see you did really well in that coursework, really celebrating them. And that was really important to them. And they also said these counselors often come from a similar background, so they really understand me, and I can really relate to them. And then the other kind of key topic or theme from the focus groups was this idea of academic probation. Students often associated with the criminal justice system, this term probation. Students felt like, oh, you get put on probation and you have to fend for yourself, and there's all these additional requirements that you have to do, and you don't have access to financial aid, and they just saw this as really devastating. Whereas the administrators were like, oh no, academic probation is more of a fail-safe. It's a way for us to get in there and help the students. So there was a real disconnect in how academic probation was perceived. Next slide. So we also, in the statewide survey, took a look at looking at things that were particularly challenging for students, and whether they were on academic probation or have never been on academic probation. And what we found that students that were on academic probation are dealing with a number of things that they reported to be moderately or very challenging. That was mental health struggles, challenges related to the pandemic. And this is not to say that, as you can look at the data, everybody found these things pretty challenging. But for students who are on academic probation, many of these things were particularly challenging. Completing transfer level coursework, access to things that allowed them to meet their basic needs, having computer tools at home that were necessary for them to do their coursework, and then having access to helpful counselors. And again, we saw how important that can be and how that can really include improve the odds for these students. So this is just a kind of another look at students who are on academic probation and kind of some of the things that they reported that were particularly challenging. The other thing that the survey allowed us to look at was students' experiences with microaggressions. So the scale allowed us to look at students that had never experienced any type of microaggression and those that had experienced at least one microaggression regularly. And then we mapped that against completion of transfer level English and math the first time the student enrolled in that course. So experiencing microaggressions didn't seem to have much of an impact on students' completion of transfer level English, but did seem to have an impact on students' first time completion of that transfer level math course. So the more regularly they experienced microaggressions, the less likely they were to complete that transfer level math course the first time that they attempted to complete it. And there's probably a lot going on here that we would want to explore, but something I think to bring to mind as you think about creating a safe space in the classroom for students and how microaggressions could really impact students' ability to be successful. So there's a website on the RP group, the webpage on the RP group website where you can find additional resources about the Through the Gate study and specifically the African American Transfer Tipping Point Project. So I'll stop there, and I think I turn it over to Dr. Hill.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to share in the space with you. And the RP group did a fantastic job with that report. I think the intentionality around students who need that support really is necessary. I always share with people that there's a fundamental difference between a handout and a hand up. And I think the more that we humanize everyone's experience, it really does move us forward. So I really want to talk to you a little bit about some of the opportunities that we have with transfer students. I always say with people, I have an opportunity to work with students from the nursery to the university. So I really get to see the 360 view of how learning takes place. And I preface that by saying that 59% of students in the K-12 system are below grade level. So right away, the opportunities in the community college, we know that the students are coming in with these really intensive needs, but oftentimes the funds and policies don't match their particular needs. So we live in this constant contradiction where educators are supposed to create places of harmony, equity, and justice, but then they're creating the isms, individualism, capitalism, competitivism. All those things really are in contradiction to the community spaces that we want to create. Next slide, please. So what we're going to do here is just briefly walk through kind of the four key elements that I want to underscore based on taking a look at the report. The first part, culture and climate, it's really important to understand the culture, not only culture based on your ethnicities, but the way based on how people learn and their ways of knowing and how they go through the world. Very important to look at culture and climate. We're all pretty familiar with Peter Drucker's work. He says that, culture will eat strategy for breakfast, but I would also argue that structure will eat stress for dinner. So I'd like to add a little bit more to that. Also looking at the cumulative disadvantages that occur when we think about things that happen outside of the four walls of school. If you are in the foster care system, if you're homeless, if you're an adult student, if you're a parent student, some of those disadvantages do create definitely some challenges within the learning environment. Culturally relevant practices. I'm really interested in that piece because we know that culturally relevant practices are 30 years old, that Gloria Lansing-Billings really highlighted that in 1994, and we're still trying to figure that out. So likewise, the Brown versus Board decision, we're on the 70th anniversary of Brown, and we're still trying to figure out how to make this great equalizer really work. And the important part about the best school or best fit is really important, the right school or the best fit. Oftentimes in the private sector, people are like, oh, it's a private school. And I'm like, but we still serve the public benefit. So it's not always looking at the rankings of schools. You're looking at the best fit because it may show you one thing on paper, but when you actually arrive there, are they ready for you? At my college, we are a student-ready college. We always tell students to be ready for college, but our college has to be ready to receive them. And we really do focus on two fundamental questions. Do we know who our students? Do we know our students? And do we know what they need? Do we know our students and do we know what they need? If we can answer those two questions, we really can design a pathway for them to complete their degree. Next slide, please. Right here, this is a slide where I want to underscore student agency. I really do think about how student agency, it's their voice and choice. We say it's for students, but we have to focus on it. And a lot of it is their competitive stamina because we're asking them to complete some rigorous activities as they're learning, as they're learning their different disciplines and getting their degrees. The big one I want to underscore here is the time management. Oftentimes our students need to really learn how to manage their time because they're balancing life and work, and you'll have to do that as you move towards your career. The problem solving and understanding how to have activism with the strategy is not necessarily saying that you don't like something, but you have to come up with a strategy to really get you to that results. In the ownership of learning, at the end of the day, you do have to own your own learning. And I think that's definitely something that our educators want to highlight. Their assertiveness, I really do like that, and setting goals. Like this is a really good compass for us to really center student agency. Also, there's opportunities for the students to work on the Dean's Council because we oftentimes throw education at students and it's happening to them. We want students to happen to education. We're kind of flipping it. So putting the student agency at the center of what we do really does help us with adapting to the challenges that they're faced with. Next slide, please. Conflict theory, when we talk about the contradictions that we live in, this conflict theory really does highlight exactly what that is. The cognitive dissonance, right? The mental stresses caused by the mental stressors caused by holding competing beliefs. I believe all children can learn, but they're not passing at the rates that we expect them to, right? I believe students should all be able to transfer and get their, their college degree, but that doesn't always ring true because we have these competing beliefs where we're saying one thing, but sometimes our actions are doing something else. And we know that language hides a crime. I was seeing in the chat that academic probation, right? I think sometimes that language is really violent, right? It makes students feel like there's a parallel with the prison system. And we know that that language is really similar. When someone is released from prison, they're saying, man, you're off to a start of your new life. It's the same thing when you graduate. It's like so interesting how the language kind of lines up with our academic system and our incarceral system. Those competing beliefs, right? When we think about cultures, when people don't believe students can learn, they're giving up on them, right? The competing beliefs from the student and the teacher. Sometimes a classroom is a battleground. The students are feeling one way and the teachers are feeling another. And then administration is the other part of that, right? So reactive devaluation, right? Rejecting the proposal based on who proposed it. A lot of times that happens when we disagree with people. And I have to share with people, I'm like, well, feelings aren't facts. It's like, well, just because you may not like the messenger, the message is still valid. And that's a part of having one of the core values that we hold near and dear is respect. Respect isn't only for people that you get along with. Respect is actually being able to sit in spaces with people you disagree with. And obviously taking a look at our biases that exist, the self-serving bias, right? The tendency to claim more responsibility for success and failure. Oftentimes the teachers give out A's and that's successful, but when students fail, the students earn the F. And we have to figure out to own the failure just as much as the success. And some would argue that we actually have to own the failure more than success because that means our students need a lot more from us. Next slide, please. Some of the recommendations that the report spoke to, I thought this was really eye-opening too for folks that are in spaces of anti-racism. Cultivating a culture free of bias and microaggressions. We know microaggressions can be harmful because sometimes that's in our unconscious bias. Like sometimes we're doing something and we don't know our own blind spots and we're not even aware that we're causing harm. Again, providing the professional development is definitely something the report really highlights. A clearly defined process for reporting racism and bias with consequences, an increase of obviously African-American and Black representation among the faculty, staff, and administrators. We know that when students aren't, I love the idea of getting them through the gate. When we know students aren't getting through the gate, it's really difficult to have that representation come back into the community college system. If they're not getting the terminal degrees, it's really difficult to leverage them coming back to take on those roles to support the next generation of learners. Next slide, please. This is Dr. Bryant Marks, who does some fantastic work on developing the continuum of becoming anti-racist. Again, this isn't something that is an evaluation, it's developmental. It's really cyclical because we're going to figure out ways and we have to be really open and honest about where we are on this pendulum with some of the institutional standing. Some people are saying that they're really, they're supporting DEI, but it's really difficult for them to have clear definitions. So taking a look at being not only, anti-racist, but understanding anti-racist in a multicultural society, right? I really do think that the diversity of scholars and the curriculum that you're able to use is really important when you're starting to look at the diversity of scholarship. Hence, when you know the cultural ways of learning and knowing, and if we add those things into the curriculum, hence you'll see an increase in achievement when students can actually see themselves showing up as actual contributors into the society. Next slide, please. Again, this is really, really interesting. I would recommend that if anyone's into the book studies, scholar Robin DiAngelo talks about white fragility and how important it is. And it's a popular consciousness. And I think this quote really gives you an idea into her world, where when we talk about the white racial lens and white fragility, it's also protecting advantage. And that popular consciousness is really a powerful ideology because it really circulates globally. I've had a chance to travel in the diaspora and you see that same kind of mindset, not only here in the United States, but in other places. You can see it in Canada, you can see it in the diaspora, you can see it I mean, you saw it in Ukraine, right? When the war happened, the African students that were getting their doctorates weren't allowed to get on the trains to leave. So when you see that behavior, it is really derived from that popular consciousness grounded here in the United States. Sometimes people will hide under willful blindness so that they don't really have to address some of the issues. So if I'm going to, place my tears, I'll center your feelings as opposed to the crime. One example that I like to use is, say, if someone is running over a person on a motorcycle and everyone goes over to the person who ran them over because they're crying. It's like, but you actually caused a crime, right? The tears doesn't remove the actual atrocity. So likewise with racism. So again, I think Rob and D'Angelo, this really fit nicely into what the report was trying to highlight. The more that we can be more reflective, it's the Freirean idea of reflection and action at the same time. So the more we're reflective and it guides our actions, it really does start to open up that gate for students to transfer. Next slide, please. And again, building community and a sense of belonging. I always tell people I like to do Maslow before Bloom, because oftentimes people are sent to school. There's a fundamental shift in the taxonomy when you think about it. Students are sent to school to achieve, right? So oftentimes they need to achieve before they belong. And what I mean by that is that they have to have certain grades and meet certain criteria before they're into a class. But education is a space of growth and development. So actually they need to belong to achieve instead of achieving to belong. And for some reason in education, we've kind of shifted that. And you don't need to talk about behavior and probation. If a student knows that they belong there, they're going to behave. They're going to meet your expectation. If you expect excellence, they will give you the excellence. So that's an important part. And the Umoja program is definitely something that has an impact, because for school systems, when you think about assessment, oftentimes we have to really understand assessment because that ties to transfer. In the co-curricular assessment, student services working with academics together. It's like, what happens when a student doesn't make it? What supports are there, right? Like a SOAR program, we want you to thrive. We want you to overcome. We don't want to call it academic probation. We want to redefine your learning journey. Next slide, please. And some of the recommendations to address some of the microaggressions, because we know that microaggressions can cause harm. We've seen many deaths of African-American scholars in the higher ed space here lately. And again, I don't want to belabor that point, but it really is important for us to notice how people are responding to how we're caring. We want to center their humanity first and foremost as we look at this work. Here, the Harvard Business Review did a good job of kind of summarizing some of the impacts of microaggressions. So it's really important that we pay attention to those. And we also want to respect people when they're saying they're not feeling well because of pain thresholds. We know that there's an assumption that minorities can have a higher level of tolerance. When people aren't okay, we do have to believe them. So it's really important that we do center their actual feelings when they're expressing some discomfort. Next slide, please. And at the very end here, I think that holistic, proactive counseling and support, because oftentimes counseling is reactive. After a student hasn't done well, then they're actually seeking out counseling. And again, if we are student-ready colleges, we want to do that beforehand. Do we know our students and do we know what they need? If we're in constant communication and we know that our students are coming to us, even when they're doing well, we can actually have better predictors. It's like an early warning system, right? I want to be able to monitor their engagement. So when I see students not showing up, then that prompts me to check in with them. Because if I'm centering their humanity and I'm really living this walk of equity, I will do that. I will conduct outreach instead of inreach, because oftentimes everything is to our convenience. Oh, my counseling is only from 9 to 12. What happened when that student can't get there during those hours? But that support is necessary. So again, we just have to think differently about how we provide those supports. Next slide, please. And again, I don't know, I didn't put the name on there on purpose because I like to kind of quiz people a little bit, but I think this is one of the most profound quotes from this genius, intellectual genius here. You cannot solve a problem at the level it was created. I don't know if anyone wants to put in the chat who this individual is. James, you can't answer. You probably already know this stuff. Yep, they got it. Albert Einstein. So again, we know that when we try to solve, we can't solve problems at the level it was created. And the other thing that really is important too, I think Steve Jobs took a page out of this too. One of the most profound statements that he said was, the most important thing that someone can do is get their thinking clear. And I just thought, wow, that's really it, because oftentimes we talk about critical consciousness, but it's rooted in clear thinking. You can be critically conscious if your thinking's unclear. Next slide, please. And again, here's some data around the nonprofit sector and what we are able to do with our financial aid packages. Oftentimes the small schools are really what students who have been underserved need, because they need that high touch. They can't go through this production model of 80,000 students and they're taking a number. On my campus, I hover around 1,200 students. And as a dean and a VP, the students, I get to know them personally. When students call, I answer the phone. I schedule meetings with them because I really want to know who they are and what they need. Because again, when you talk about social justice, diversity, respect, and inclusion, you actually have to act like it, right? We know that when people show you who they are, you have to believe them. And we really want people to believe that when they come to our school, and you get that opportunity to feel that kind of energy from the faculty to the staff. That's a healing form practice that we have, healing informed practice that people know when they come, they're going to be seen, they're going to be heard, they're going to be valued. So again, this is just some data for you all to consider as you continue on your journey. Next slide, please. And again, the culturally relevant practices, sorry about the font there with the compassion, compassion, empathy, and action. So really compassion is empathy and action together. Because it's one thing to feel sorry for someone, but there's another thing to actually have some actions to change their conditions, right? So that's a really important part of the culturally relevant pedagogy. And then also you can definitely look at scholars who are amplifying that culturally sustaining pedagogy. Sami Helene and Django Paris, they're at the University of Washington. They're in the School of Multicultural Studies under James A. Banks, who's the father of that kind of work. So again, they're starting to expand on what we need to do in these spaces to really affirm the identities of the students that we serve. Next slide, please. And again, I know if anyone ever really wants to get a deep look at Dr. King, he's not this marshmallow figure that people paint him to be. In the 1960s, he had a 37% approval rating. He was not just, everyone was happy with what he was doing, because he truly was a justice seeker and a disruptor. And I love this quote, truth is the absolute standard by which reality is measured, right? We do have to be comfortable with the truth, even when it's not to our benefit. But that's a part of really building our humility and our critical pedagogy, is to really grapple with that. And I think that's about it for me. And then we can take questions.